welcome to the third episode of Prompt and Circumstance. Hi, Brian. It's good to see you.
Good to see you again as well, Daniel.
Yeah. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you may watch this. So this time we wanted to discuss a bit more overall topic around AI, and that is the perception and how people embrace the technology overall. And we decided to do so because you came across some interesting insights and data that got a conversation going between the two of us. So maybe why don't I hand it over to you to kick us off with that?
Yeah, thank you. There's a few different data points that we saw, and they all speak to sentiment around AI, which might be different than what either has been presented in the media or that we might know from our personal experience. Because the key takeaway is that depending if you are an AI expert, if you're a business leader, or if you're just the general population, in this case in the US, but some studies that suggest this is true in many places, you probably have wildly different views about artificial intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
In particular, this Pew Research Center piece suggests that the general public and the expert set on AI are very far apart
Mm-hmm.
on their enthusiasm for AI, their predictions about AI, how much they use it in everyday life, which is unsurprising. But for all the hype and pomp and circumstance around AI, the two groups are actually pretty far apart. So it suggests that not as many people are using it as we might have suspected, that people actually have a far more pessimistic view in many markets towards it that we might otherwise think. I mean, we already knew that people were nervous about job loss, data security, misinformation, deep fakes, but this suggests a far bigger skepticism and hesitation around AI in many facets of life, be it healthcare, education, impacts on variety of different industries, elections. So it does kind of beg the question of, I think many businesses, of course, the AI and tech companies themselves will just keep forging ahead. That horse is bolted, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
But do we need to step back and reassess uh, where we are in the state of AI when it comes to how we talk about this, how we counsel our clients on it?
Well, first of all, I can completely agree with the bandwidth of perception that I also experience, even within the professional field. So when I speak to like clients or I do the AI Academy trainings, I just meet so many different POVs in general, and that's already a peer group of people who should be quite exposed and positive towards the technology, embracing the technology. Not to mention that when I would go speak to my neighbor who like has a blue collar job, probably has a very, very different experience when thinking about AI. So yes, I can see that. But what's the takeaway? The takeaway, first of all, or the approach first of all would probably be to be very aware of that divide and not be too much captured in our own bubble of just being enthusiastic and throw ourselves at the technology or the technology at ourselves, depending. As much as I'd like to do that myself, but it's important to be aware that not everybody you talk to may be as open and as enthusiastic. There will be skeptics. And I think the one thing that is so different than to any other industrial development over the last probably 200 years is that it's just impossible to predict how the world is going to look like in just a very few months from today. I mean, if we discussed the whole creative side last time we spoke, right, about image creation and all of that, and how far and how quickly that had developed. And I think that's probably what leads to so much caution or skepticism, is that we as people are just not able to keep up with the speed, the pace of the development there. So yeah, I guess from an investment point of view, from a pure play business point of view, very much as you say, there's no way back. There's no way to. I can't imagine a company standing up and saying we will not allow any AI anywhere in our operation, and that being a positive message to any investors.
Yeah,
Happy to discuss if you have another point of view. Maybe there is certain industries, but I just can't imagine one from a just financial investing point of view. So that's, as you said, that horse is bolted. But probably how you communicate that to your various audiences is where you have to be very mindful of how to approach that. That would be my immediate reaction to those
agreed.
insights.
And one of the other wrinkles, the data that we're showing right now from Pew Center is, of course, U.S. data, but we did find some other global data from Stanford University and a few other sources, which suggests markets are also in a very different place when it comes
Mm-hmm.
to AI sentiment.
I can
So
imagine.
the US, Canada, a lot of different European nations, including Germany, all in the 30s and 40s when it comes to positive view out of 100 on AI. Very different story for China, Indonesia, Thailand, much of uh, the part of the world that I'm in, Asia Pacific. 83, 80, 77% positive view of AI products and services being beneficial,
Mm-hmm.
playing a positive role in society for those markets.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I guess what strikes me is not only the stark difference between experts and general population or between different countries, but the fact that how do companies kind of coherently convey a narrative around AI given those divisions? Do they need to suddenly be creating a variety of different AI positionings and messagings and targetings depending on geographic split, audience split,
Mm-hmm.
uh, channel perhaps? Is this going to become kind of a two-track approach where they have different realities when it comes to AI depending who they're talking to?
Maybe not entirely different realities, but what you say reminds me of something I heard last year at Cannes Lions. There was a panel where I think it was Richard Edelman who said that basically his bottom line was global storytelling is dead because of hyper localization and an embrace by I don't want to say nationalism on the consumer side, but a high focus on products, services being developed in market. That was more or less the bottom line. And if you remember when we do our future of communications report presentations, we also talk about hyper localization being a trend, and then also on that point, APAC versus EMEA or US markets, not specifically around AI, but when we talk about influencers and the embrace of, well, artificial influencers, it is AI actually, how it's much more accepted already in APAC markets, but it is
Yeah.
already spilling into others. So I'm not too surprised by APAC markets acceptance and positive view on AI technology being much higher. It may also be just speculating here, but it may also be that more heavily industrialized nations like the US, like Germany, like old school industry, they've already been hit by the automation momentum a couple of times when robots took over the work, when digitization took over a lot of the jobs, and now again
Mm.
we're faced
Yep.
with
Yep.
artificial intelligence taking away even the high level white collar lines. That might be a driver versus don't want to build on stereotypes, but many Asian markets have much less um, fear around privacy and data protection, and then also have been thriving over the last 20, 30 years with the digital revolution, with the globalization of our markets. So that may be one of the drivers why there's less skepticism, more embrace, and saying this is another technology, as we've seen with the likes of DeepSeek and others that can be coming out of APEC and driving the global development. So yeah, I guess
Yeah,
that may
absolutely.
explain some of
Yeah.
that divide.
Yeah, I'd
So
agree. I think there's a welcome embrace of um, anything that could just further accelerate the rise of nations over here from emerging to, fully mature. And not to get too much into the news of late, but I think even before the latest tariff, headlines, different nations were already thinking about technology, sovereign data, and how to
yeah,
establish different relationships with countries than they've had in the past. And there's been really positive momentum here in ASEAN or with China plus one trading strategies, and AI and data centers have been a big piece of that.
definitely same thing here in Europe. There's a certain trend on all kinds of social channels around alternatives to the big US tech companies and which cloud providers you could use or which chat programs, which messaging programs, for like people are trying to set up alternatives for pretty much everything that has been very much dependent on US technology. I think it's not going to, as with, just to give a couple of examples, Mastodon never really became the next big messaging app. And even
Yeah,
with the recent last 12 months developments around X, it's still there. It still hasn't been completely like
yeah.
shifted towards blue skies or other services. So I
Is
don't
it
think it's going to,
Mistral that's the big French
yeah, that's
large
the
language
AI. Yeah.
model?
Yeah. The Le Chat or Le Chat is their service. It's a play on the
Is there
French word
a
for cat.
leading German LLM? No.
No, unfortunately not. We had one. Embarrassingly enough, the name has just escaped me. But it's not on pace, on par with the international model. So the French one is the European star.
Standard. Right.
Yeah, at this point. Um, but then with the just the pace of the development there, somebody can come out of the blue tomorrow and
Yeah.
basically, as we've seen happening week after week after week over recent months. So, but coming back to that whole divide in audiences, I think that's just really something very very interesting for our clients as well. Is because we should always be aware that we as counselors, but also our clients who sit on the marketing deciders positions or the communications in communications PR managing roles, we are all part of a quite elite bubble. When I look on my LinkedIn feed, it's a very specific audience, obviously that
Yeah.
that I meet there, um, and I don't have to go very far to meet people who have a very different point of view on things. It starts when I start to speak to creatives in our own organization, right? If I speak to designers, to copywriters, to creative directors who may be driven by many other things than you and me, um, and they have a different point of view. There's obviously some anxiety around what the technology will do to their roles and how it will change, or the fear definitely is there. Will it take my role? Will it take my job at some point? So that definitely drives some skepticism, and I believe there's even more better examples like translators, or there's been, was it 23, where there's the writer's guild strike in Hollywood when they
Exactly. Yeah. It
demonstrated,
was a huge part of
right?
their deal negotiation.
So that's it's not entirely new that people are in fear in those cases of AI taking away their jobs. And I don't think we as a society at this point don't really have an answer to why it wouldn't happen. And that definitely drives some skepticism. Interesting would be to know, maybe you have some ideas around why APEC or Asian markets are less, there may be less fear. Is this because those traditional industries are just not as prominent or as broadly ingrained in the societies?
I I'd hesitate to make kind of sweeping claims because I think each country would probably have their own interests at heart. Some it would be um, a point of sovereign pride, like DeepSeek for China. Some it would be the rise of the industry aligns very well with their own national ambitions, like data centers in Malaysia. Um, whereas other markets, I think, just genuinely anything that is has such a relatively low barrier to entry, but the prospect of such a great economic rise in return is just so enticing for markets where their average, you know, their populace is living on dollars a day
Mm-hmm.
because they don't need to build factories or
Mm-hmm.
have industry come in or be natively born. They can just invest in the data infrastructure of their nation, which they want to do anyway, and it can, ideally birth like a new kind of knowledge class of workers.
That's a very, yeah,
The
very
key is it's got to
interesting point. Yeah.
align with each country, and what they're uniquely trying to do.
Yeah. Which takes us back to the point you were getting to earlier is the takeaway for our clients, for our counseling, then that yes, we will have to have our stories lined up to not only overall cultural differences across European, Middle East, APEC, and sorry, I'm generalizing, but just by saying APEC, obviously that's like an enormously large and
Agreed. Yeah, and
uh,
global South as well.
region. Yeah, yeah,
Africa
exactly.
and
Yeah.
LATAM.
So it's not only to be culturally aware of or aware of cultural differences, but really we would have to be even more diligent in looking into specific local markets, national, even to use that word, differences in when we talk about the technology that we apply or the AI technology that is ingrained in services and in technology when we roll out campaigns and develop campaigns for our clients,
Yeah,
which
agreed.
which would
And
mean even though we can gather the data more easily than in a couple of years ago, it's probably even more work now that requires some deep thinking, human thinking, and consultation in coming up with how to develop storylines that are, well, not different realities, as you said earlier, but t- like just addressing the local nuances, but still pay into a global storyline that makes sense. Because I guess the other thing that doesn't make sense is to tell one nation, one cultural cohort one story and another one a completely different one for the same device, the same service, the same consultation, whatever.
I agree broadly, but I do think in this case that the data suggested some audiences are so far apart, or I should say, so another way to look at it, so early to the adoption cycle that they just may not be ready to hear the message, where others are hyper receptive. So you might need, in addition to that hyper personalized and nuanced strategy, kind of a very careful adoption roadmap or messaging roadmap, um, where you have a certain message and a high frequency and interactivity with audiences that really want to hear that message and are primed for it. Your early adopters, analysts, business peers, um, optimistic markets, but then it kind of phases down to
Mm-hmm.
markets where if you did anywhere near the same message, you might not only just not reach people, but you might actively turn them off because they're still harboring skepticism or fear or pushback against it.
Mm-hmm. It's quite an interesting challenge from a brand comms perspective, right? I mean, how do you want to be perceived? It's probably easy for like a global brand like Coca-Cola, who's quite distant from all these kinds of developments. But if you're a technology-driven company, um, reliant on this, or if you have a new service up that is heavily reliant on that, it might be quite a challenge to, well, not to become too excited about your own technology and still deliver that message that you're actually bringing something new to the ecosystem or to the industry. I,
Agreed.
I, is it? Do we want to agree on be very aware of the divide in your audiences, and not generalizing from on the basis of individual subjective perception.
Yeah, I always say publicly available research like this is something that prompts or should prompt an organization to do further investigation themselves. So I'd encourage people to, and our clients to, or other prospective brands, actually go out there and maybe test this hypothesis with your own audiences. Make sure you ask them what they do think about AI, not just AI more broadly, not just your specific AI product or service offering, because it might confirm some of this data that you need that nuanced, personalized, segmented, hyper localized messaging strategy.
Just to, sorry to, I don't want to put you on the spot there, but to maybe prompt one of our future conversations, that could be synthetical audiences to test it with. So maybe that's something we can lean into.
That's true, and we
a
are
bit more,
playing around with it, and you do
Yeah.
get some really interesting, utilities and nuance if you build the agents that power those audiences right.
So maybe building on what we just discussed today, that could be something to look into.
Should we leave it
in
on
the near
that
future.
teaser for the audience?
Yeah, big teaser for everyone who stayed with us until this moment, and they should be excited for the next episode then.
All
Great.
right, well, we'll pick it up then.
Cool. Thanks for your time, and have a good rest of your day.
See you again soon.
Bye-bye.